What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel and another Fantasy Football Tiers episode where we break down my top 30 wide receiver tiers and rankings for Week 9 Fantasy Football. I'll be diving into and investigating the matchups for this week and breaking down where I see potential detriments, downfalls for these players, or, of course, why these players will succeed and thrive. And I've got a really interesting note on this week's games at the top of today's episode. So stay tuned for all that and more, and let's dive in. All right, so I gave this a try in the running back episode this week as well, but basically what I'm going to do here, and let me know if you guys want me to go back to breaking down these stud matchups as well, but we know who the top guys are every week in fantasy football. We know who the studs are, the sit and forget type players. I'll toss them out there. You might disagree and have different feelings on my ordering of these players. Of course, left to right is how I numerically rank them, but at the end of the day, these studs are the studs. I'll cover them extremely quickly. So the one note I did want to make about this matchup, or the week's matchups per se, is I think that the studs are the guys with the tougher matchups this week, if that makes sense. So your wide receiver 2s and 3s can really be week winners in this week's games, and I loved a lot of them. It was really hard for me to find must-sit players because I felt that so many of the second and third options in offenses this week had really great opportunities to step up to the plate and thrive here. So your guys like Stephon Diggs having a top 10 matchup this week. Tyreek Hill having a top 4 matchup. Now, they lost some key defensive players in Chicago, but still on paper, a more difficult matchup. You've got other guys like A.J. Brown taking on the 6th ranked Houston Texans defense against fantasy receivers. All of these guys are dealing with the more stingy opponents, and that's going to leave a lot of openings in the middle ground. So be excited about that. Toss some receivers in your flex. It's a really weak running back week here in Week 9. So let's get into our next tier here again. Justin Jefferson taking on Washington. That's a lighter matchup. Again, Tyreek against Chicago, Stephon against the Jets, and then Cooper Kupp, the only reason he's my 4th ranked receiver as opposed to being number 1 this week. He's a bit banged up. Sounds like the ankle is going to be okay, but didn't participate in walkthroughs on Wednesday, and is basically expected to be limited throughout the week, entering into a matchup against Tampa Bay. Let's toss up the next tier. All right, once again, this tier is filled with stud players, so not going to spend too much time getting into the nitty-gritty details, but A.J. Brown against the Houston Texans does have a tougher matchup. Derek Stingley's been very good to start this season. And on the back end, Lovie Smith has done a very good job of securing this position against fantasy receivers. Very, very good player, though, coming off his best game of the year. DeAndre Hopkins, he balled last week against Minnesota. This week he has Seattle, a tougher matchup in the secondary. Again, another stud that has a tough matchup. Woolen has been playing fantastic ball for the Seahawks defense, and they've been flying around back there. They've got speed on that defense once again. Devontae Adams, coming off of his stinker performance of the year, has Jacksonville this week. I think he'll have a bounce-back game here. And really all these guys last week had a monster game except for Adams. And then Jalen Waddle, who is incredibly efficient with every touch he gets. Is he always going to be targeted as much as Tyreek Hill? No. But last week it didn't matter. He goes out there and continues to ball out. Again, he doesn't need lead opportunities. If he does, that's all the better. But these two are a unit that has created cohesive existence here, and Waddle has been very dominant, obviously, alongside Tyreek. So this week he's got Chicago again, and I think that he could just thrive in this matchup if a lot of attention is diverted Hill's way. All right, here we go into the bubble wide receiver 1s tier. Now, I'm not going to be diving into excruciating detail with these players, but I will be covering them a bit more in depth here. T. Higgins this week has the Carolina Panthers. Now, he straight up got bailed out last week by a Moss touchdown, which he created, so props to him for making that play. But at the end of the day, this offense was very inefficient and was struggling to produce because of the hellacious Browns pass rush. Carolina is no joke in terms of their pass rush with Brian Burns. They're not on the same level as Cleveland, though, with 2 premier edge rushers on both sides of the field. So I think Joe's got some more comfortability in the pocket this week and is able to deliver more opportunities to T, therefore creating a situation where I think he could be a strong top 12 play this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, but again, he's still not in the same class as those other guys, so that's the reason he's the top of this tier. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a lot of panic surrounding him this week. Still had 10 targets, 69 yards and 7 catches, so not great efficiency, less than 10 yards per catch, but right there. And for a guy that plays the Packers this week, he ate him up late in the season last year. Not going to be surprised if he goes out there and balls out again this week. He should be 100% healthy now. Detroit plays at home in their controlled environment of Ford Field. I've said that a bunch of times in this week's episodes, but it does matter for this team. They're so much better at home versus on the road, and now I do feel very comfortable that ARSB is healthy for this game, starting him with full confidence this week, especially in PPR formats. Mike Evans, he is a whopping, I was shocked to see this when I went back and look at some analytics here. 26 targets in the last 2 weeks. He is getting a monsoon of opportunities thrown his direction from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers led by Tom Brady. Now, are all these targets high-level opportunities? No, they are not. There's a lot of throwing the ball into the dirt here for Tampa Bay and Tom Brady. But overall, Mike Evans has been a bright spot for this offense. And if Chris Godwin can get it going as well, this team might just have the overall opportunity to turn things around and become a better squad moving forward. And then DK Metcalf. We all thought the guy tore his knee up and was, done for a few weeks and was going to be in shaky territory. Guy walks out, 10 targets, 55 yards, and a touchdown in his first game back. Now, Arizona's been very good against opposing wide receivers. They've been a very strong and competent unit here in terms of the Cardinals secondary. But at the end of the day, you got to trust DK Metcalf. That's why he's in the bubble wide receiver 1 group this week, though. Obviously, things could go south and maybe he has a bust game here, but he looked fine last week out there on the field and, continues to play at a high level, is incredibly difficult to stop in contested catch situations. So I'll be starting with confidence. He is our wide receiver 12 for this week. Let's dive into our next tier. Just 3 names here in the elite wide receiver 2 territory: Chris Godwin, Chris Olave, Tyler Lockett. Now, for Godwin, it comes down to opportunities. Like I said with Mike Evans, not all these opportunities are high level quality, but in 80% of his last 5 games, so 4 out of 5 here, he has had double-digit targets. That is worth something. He has not scored a touchdown yet this season as well, so hasn't tapped into that ceiling. But they've got the Rams this week. I expect Ramsey to play a larger part of the game on Mike Evans. There should be some work to be had for Chris Godwin in the slot in this matchup and potentially have his first touchdown of the season. Chris Olave here coming off one of his worst weeks as of late, snapping his 10-plus point game streak. However, this is a guy who had a 24-point blowout win, no points scored by the Raiders last week. What are you going to do? The game script went horribly wrong. I did not predict that would happen. And at the end of the day, you're looking at a massive lopsided Saints win. So I don't think that's the case again here in happens versus Baltimore. I think Baltimore is a much more sufficient opponent. The Saints defense has struggled against rushing quarterbacks, particularly Jalen Hurts in the last couple of years. So this is a game where I like their chances to continue airing it out. Tyler Lockett here. This matchup, again, against Arizona, this was actually the worst game of the season for Lockett. I don't think that happens again. Maybe he doesn't have a overall high ceiling production performance, but I do think this is a matchup where he can succeed in. This is also a game, though, where I joked about after that contest in Week 6, there's the expression, hit your head on the goalpost. Tyler Lockett was literally ran into the goalpost by a deep shot that could have been a touchdown from Geno Smith. So there were missing points hanging on the table for Lockett in this game. I just think that he needs to capitalize on those opportunities this time around, and I think that Seattle will get a bit better, and these receivers will have a bit more of a successful time here in Week 10, the second of the 2 matchups between these 2 teams this season. All right, into the strong wide receiver 2 category now. So we've got DJ Moore, Tyler Boyd, and Terry McLaurin, all 3 of these guys making our must-start wide receivers list for this week. I love the situations here. For DJ Moore, it's back-to-back 16-plus point games and half PPR scoring. PJ Walker has revived his season here now. Is this the most dependable quarterback play? No, but it is competence. You're seeing that Baker Mayfield was clearly a hurting situational factor here that a lot of people kind of thought would be a positive throughout the summer. I didn't necessarily think of it as that. I thought of it as more stability than Sam Darnold per se. Boy, was that wrong. I mean, he was erratic and just causing a woeful handful of problems for this offensive attack. And PJ, to his credit, has delivered again back-to-back 16-plus point performances for Moore here. So, yes, a lot of that came off of a Hail Mary touchdown late in the game that kind of saved his week and really gave him that ceiling value here. I guess I shouldn't say it saved his week, but added a lot more to the table. I don't know if he'll have that level of ceiling in this week's games, but what I do know is that the Carolina Panthers are playing the Cincinnati Bengals defense, which on paper is a tough and stingy matchup against opposing wide receivers, but lost their top corner, Chidobe Awuzie, for the season to an ACL injury. So it was a very thin unit against the Browns on Monday night last week. We saw Amari Cooper take advantage of that late in the game. I expect some level of targeting downfield for DJ in this matchup. For Tyler Boyd, saved by a touchdown, a fluky play like we talked about with T. Higgins. Both of these guys did not have a great game in week 8. However, they did both get bailed out with touchdowns. And at the end of the day, Tyler Boyd had 5 targets, 3 catches. One of them was a score. So he got the job done. I expect more work and more competence, stability from this O-line and ability to give Burrow time to distribute the football. I think across the board, this matchup gets better for Higgins and Boyd and other pass catchers in Cincinnati's offense. And then Terry McLaurin here. Vikings secondary, I don't think, despite Pat P making some plays last week, I don't think they have anyone on the perimeter of this defense that can guard Terry McLaurin man for man in this secondary. So I expect some deep shots. Taylor Heineke has been a very big positive for Terry's fantasy value this season. We've seen, surprisingly, Carson Wentz was not the guy to do that for Terry this year, and it's resulted in back-to-back 13-plus point games. I think Terry continues to play competently and give us a 10-plus point performance here this week. Again, I do think that the ceiling is higher in this matchup because you're getting a matchup on paper that's very good against a weaker secondary. So fingers crossed for Terry this week. I think things result in a positive fashion for the third straight week here. But of course, despite the fact that Taylor has been a positive for him in the situation this year, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that will continue to be something that, pulls forward here every single week. All right, into my receivers 19 through 24 now. So rounding out the wide receiver twos group in the bubble tier here for me. Kicking it off with Gabe Davis. So last week, Gabe had a season high 7 targets against the Packers. It resulted in 2 catches for 35 yards. Not fantastic, obviously. So kind of showing that he continues to be a boomer bust play every single week. The reason that I'm a bit skeptical on him here, and I think that if you have anyone higher on the tiers list to be a flex play for this week or a wide receiver 2, I would head that direction, is he's got a top 10, 9th ranked overall Jets secondary. Now, he's not going to be seeing a whole lot of Sauce Gardner. I think that's going to be more of a Stephon Diggs issue, which he will probably prevail over. However, this is a secondary that's been buttoned up. This defense has been very good. The pass rush has been solid. And at the end of the day, this is the Bills' high-powered offense. Gabe Davis is completely capable of going for 20-plus points any given week. But with a guy who has seen 7 targets or fewer in all games and 6 targets or less in all but one, I feel like this is a game where it is justified to maybe bet against Gabe Davis here in Week 9. Michael Pittman. I want to be higher on Pittman for this week. I actually contemplated him for the sit list. However, it's such a tricky situation. Sam Ehlinger could get totally eaten alive by Bill Belichick this week. That's the scare here. I'm not worried about Pittman because he got stuffed in the 1-yard line last week and could have scored a touchdown to boost his points 6 points higher and get him into that starting level territory, which we had him as designated for last week. So we were 1 yard away from 6 more points, which he didn't get it done, so whatever. But the Ehlinger problem and situation with New England is what really gives me trouble, is that if Bill shuts him down and just makes this a disaster for this team offensively, everyone's at risk for a total stinker here. So if you can, I'd stay away from him here this week. The reason that Keenan Allen, we have as a must-start player from yesterday's episode, behind these 2 options, is the risky fact and scenario that you've got a guy who continues to be hampered by this hamstring at practice, and despite coming off of a bye week, continues to look shaky for game day this week. So he is trending down. For me, Josh Palmer is trending up this week. This is a matchup against the Falcons. I mean, both of these guys on paper are must-starts easily, but if they're limited and health is a problem, of course, Palmer's a concussion, so it's kind of you're in or you're out. But for Allen, and by the way, Sleeper Fantasy, what the heck are you guys doing? I love that app more than anything, but they go back and forth with Palmer healthy, Palmer questionable, Palmer healthy. If you have notifications on for that app and you have a share of those guys on any team, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, health is the concern here. This is the juiciest matchup, though, against the Falcons defense for any fantasy wide receiver. So keep your eye on that. Devontae Smith on a short week against the Texans is something that I think has the opportunity to be nice here. Is not going to see a lot of Derek Stingley. I think that's going to be an A.J. Brown situation here. So at the end of the day, targets is what it's going to come down to. We've seen that Jalen Hurts can provide for Dallas Goedert or Devontae Smith. We haven't seen too much of both being situationally successful in a single matchup. I believe it did happen against the Vikings this year, but outside of that, it's been a little bit inconsistent. It's kind of one or the other, and whoever the matchup favors. So he's a streaky wide receiver too. Definitely has a ceiling though. Romeo Doubs, I do have him as a must start this week, or Allen Lazard, but I'm trending towards Allen not playing. So there is a lot of upside in this tier. Like I've talked about, there is some risk as well, though. I do think Dobbs is a really strong flex play this week, though. This is a Detroit matchup that is one of the worst secondaries in the NFL this year. So there is opportunity to be had. Capitalizing on it, of course, is a big deal. And if you can get him in your lineups and you don't have too much depth here, which a lot of teams have a ton of wide receiver depth, he can make an impact and have a nice ceiling here. Of course, the floor is always a bit risky, though. And then Juju. This is a matchup against Tennessee, the 29th ranked unit against fantasy wide receivers. I love it. I think it's great on paper. paper. And I'm not too concerned about Kadarius Toney yet. He is coming off of a bye week, but did just get traded for. It'll be his first game with the team. So even though there's extended time here, this isn't a Christian McCaffrey level player where you expect him to just go out there and totally kill it after being on the roster for a week and a half. So for Juju, I do think that coming off his 2 best games of the season, you could stack a third one here and maybe continue the Sal High process into week 10. We'll see though, and obviously analyze and evaluate that in a coming week here. But I do think he is a strong top 24 wide receiver for this week. He is the 24th ranked wide receiver for me, so keep your eye on him for this week's matchups. All right, last up here, the flex tier. So these are players that obviously don't have the best floors in the world, but do have some upside. Kicking it off with Christian Kirk. Now, Christian Kirk's kind of, I saw a comment about this. I'll steal your phrase here. I forget exactly who said this a while back, but the honeymoon phase, unfortunately, is kind of over, it appears, for this team. I think the defenses have realized that in the passing game, you can shut down this Jags offense and force Trevor Lawrence to make some pretty poor choices if you just take away Christian Kirk. Now, he has had 1 10-point game since week 4. That's a bit concerning. Obviously, the floor has not been what we expected. As the slot receiver, he's still getting a good amount of targets, but it's just not something that's been a consistent weekly thing here, and it's been trending down the last month or so. Adam Thielen's got the Washington Commanders defense this week. This is a really strong streaming opportunity for wide receiver 2. Again, the only thing you worry about here is volume and touchdown productivity. If you were to bet that would happen this week, I think you'd be smart to do so. I think there is an opportunity here, and he was close to making my must-start players list, but due to injury, I was a little bit skeptical too. It sounds like he's healthy and good to go now. So if you want to give him the green light and put him in your flex spot for this week, the Washington Commanders are 26th against receivers this year, so allowing a lot of points to that position. Josh Palmer, again, trending up here. If he plays this week, he's a great start against a weak Falcons secondary. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had here, and I'd be excited about this matchup. Next up, Jacoby Myers taking on the second-ranked Colts defense against opposing fantasy receivers. That gives me some worry. This is the number 1 pass catcher in this offense, though. Tends to get targets in spots where they need to move the chains. So it's going to be hit or miss. Does he make a big play? Does he get a bunch of targets? Whatever the case might be, this Colts defense is really good at stopping those big plays, and Myers isn't typically the guy that makes them. But he is a guy that is a safety blanket, a check down option for this team, and could get enough volume to put him in the flex level territory for PPR. Curtis Samuel taking on the Minnesota Vikings this week. It's a good matchup on paper. He is the slot receiver, though, and I think that he has taken a little bit of a value hit since Heineke's been introduced into this offense. So what it comes down to for Curtis Samuel at the end of the day for me is targets and overall ability to produce with his receptions. He hasn't been super efficient after the catch this year, although he has had a high volume of opportunities head his direction. So again, PPR-wise, he is a flexible player this week. I do think his ceiling is a little bit limited. You're just hoping for that floor value. And then Brandon Cooks, good old B Cooks here, didn't get moved at the trade deadline. He was pretty pissed off, had that infamous tweet there. Is questionable for this game on Thursday night, the day you're watching this episode. Hopefully, I would stay away. I'm really not looking to start him this week. 2 really good perimeter corners, questionable with injuries coming into this game. It's a wrist injury, I want to say. And then you've got the fact that this Eagles defense, again, 2 elite perimeter corners, really good pass rush. I don't think Davis Mills is going to be too comfortable back there passing. So there you have it. My top 30 wide receiver tiers and rankings for week 9. As always, you can get the rest of my rankings on sizzlefantasy.com for every position group for this week, as well as bi-weekly updated rest of season rankings. Again, by checking out sizzlefantasy.com or by using code SFS on Underdog Fantasy, depositing $10 or more and getting access to all the stuff on our website for free through this year, as well as access to my DMs on our Discord server to ask me questions and get your advice for the rest of this season. So again, Underdog Fantasy, code SFS, check all that stuff out. I'll get in touch with you and hook you up with your Discord and website access. Look out for an email for me if you choose to sign up for that platform. We love our buddies over there at Underdog. They have a phenomenal prop betting site and ways you can play different in-game contests that are super, super fun. I love their in-season drafts and other things you can do to make the season a bit more spiced up and fun. So check those guys out. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. We appreciate the heck out of you for stopping by and watching today's episode. Let me know your thoughts, questions, concerns in the comment section below, and I'll see you there. Peace out.